Hello and welcome to Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. This is episode 2, and today we're going to be talking all about some of the most memorable characters in classic TV history. Now, we're going to be talking about characters from the 1960s and the 1970s. Now, even though I didn't come into the world until July 4th, 1971, to be specific, a lot of the shows that came out in the 60s I caught in reruns, and so I was a fan of those. So um, that's where my place of classic TV starts, 1960s and 70s. So we're going to get into it now, in no particular order. Of course, going back to the 1960s, Andy Taylor. Of course, I'm talking about Sheriff Andy Taylor from the Andy Griffith Show. You know, he was, he was pretty kind of a funny guy, and downtown, Southern charm he had, and you couldn't help but laugh at Andy Taylor. Very memorable character, played the local sheriff, and then, of course, when he teamed up with his sidekick, Deputy Sheriff Barney Fife, it was just all laughs and madcap craziness. And of course, Don Knotts is the one that played the lovable goofball known as Barney Fife. And I mean, Barney Fife, you got to remember, predates Ralph Furley on Three's Company. And even though those two characters are very much alike, you got to just give it to Don Knotts. I mean, he, excuse me, he played the part so well. I mean, he really did. I mean, he was that lovable sidekick that every show kind of, if you have that was kind of a needed formula, for when you had a comedy show. And Andy and Barney were like, they were tight. They were really great friends. And of course, Andy was the kind of smart one, the one with all the intelligence. And Barney got to tag along kind of as a sidekick. And everybody thought that, Barney was a real kind of dork and idiot, but he also kind of made us laugh. And so that was kind of, for many people, their first taste of Don Knotts. And then, of course, Don Knotts eventually left the Andy Griffith Show, and he went on to have a even bigger movie career, like did all those great Disney movies and all those movies like the Reluctant Astronaut, The Wildest Gun in the West, the Love God. I mean, those are just to name a few. And Andy and Don Knotts, they stayed, really good friends for the rest of their lives, and they hung out and every once in a while they would do stuff together, like Andy Griffith, of course, later on in his career, like I believe it was in the 90s, had the show Madlock, and every so often Don Knotts would guest star on Madlock, do a guest appearance. So that was really fun, to do. Now, okay, let's see. Samantha Stevens, of course. Who didn't love Samantha Stevens and the way she wiggles her nose? Of course, I'm talking about Bewitched, and when you think of a witch, Samantha Stevens is the complete opposite of what you think of a witch. She was a beautiful witch. I mean, typically, when we think of witches, you think of Halloween, and they got scaly green skin, and they're mean and they're nasty. When we think of witch, you typically think of wearing that witch's hat, very much kind of like the evil witch in the Wizard of Oz. But Samantha Stevens was the complete opposite of that. Not only did she, do the black magic, but she also is very beautiful. And I remember as a kid watching Bewitched and not really being able to understand what is wrong with Darren Stevens. He's got this beautiful wife. She's got, not only is she beautiful, but she's got this magic she can do, this secret power. And I know I thought, well, wow, what's this guy's problem? He, of course, the whole story behind Bewitched is, Darren Stevens is immortal. He's married to this beautiful witch, and he doesn't want her to partake in any of that black magic. He doesn't want things handed to him. He wants to earn things. And again, we laugh at this because we all think as we're watching Bewitched, man, if I was married to a beautiful witch like that, and she, she could make all my dreams come true. I don't know that I have the morality of Darren Stevens to say no more witchcraft, no more witchcraft. And then of course Darren always was the butt of the jokes as far as Samantha's relatives. I mean, and Doria made him into everything from a to a donkey to making Samantha think that he was cheating on her. I think one episode he was a cat. So he was the butt of Samantha's family's jokes, and I even loved how Endora gave him the enduring nickname, Dorwood. If you watch some of the very classic black and white episodes, before he started being referred to as Dorwood, in some of the earlier black and white episodes, Endora actually referred to Darren as Deerwood. So that's just some fun trivia for you. Now, around the same time in the 1960s, there was a TV show, Genie. Now, Genie, of course, was what you typically think of. The story behind Genie was, that he rubs a lamp and the genie comes out and he becomes her master, and his every wish is her command. And basically, it's kind of like Bewitched all over again. You got this guy who's a real ethical mortal, and he doesn't want to. He's got this power, this beautiful genie, but he doesn't want to take advantage of it. He feels like that would be the wrong thing to do, and because she's always doing her magic and trying to serve her master, he gets in all kinds of trouble, and Genie does as well. And now Genie, the big controversy of that show, you may remember, was she was wearing that bikini top, and back in the 1960s, you couldn't show too much skin on TV, and so that's a big thing about her showing her navel on TV, and there's a huge controversy about it. But Genie was definitely a fun show to watch. She was one of my most memorable characters of my lifetime. Not only was she beautiful, but she could do that beautiful magic. And man, just like I had dreams about Samantha Stevens, I had dreams about Genie. What else can I say? Just an everyday growing boy, all American boy, they say. Herman Munster. Again, this is a character that dates back to the 1960s. And Herman Munster, think of modern day Frankenstein. He looks and he acts like Frankenstein, going back to the Frankenstein monster movie all the way back. I believe it was 1931 when the original Frankenstein came out. But the Munster was basically, based off of the Frankenstein monster, except this Frankenstein, he has a family. His wife and his son and his father-in-law, they're all, father-in-law looks like Count Dracula, and he's married to Count Dracula's wife, Lily. Their son looks like a combination of Dracula and the Wolfman. And this family of monsters, they think they're the most beautiful thing. They think they are so beautiful, and nobody's as beautiful as them. They just don't have a clue. They're living in their own little bubble, as you say. And then their beautiful niece, Marilyn, of course, she's a true beauty of the family, but even Marilyn and the rest of her family, they think she's the ugly duckling. Oh, if they only knew. And like I said, Herman Munster is this oversized, kind of adolescent personality-wise, childlike Frankenstein that when he doesn't get his way, he jumps up and down. I want to. So again, the Munsters in the 1960s, they were taking horror, based on the classic Universal horror movies, to the next level, and they were throwing in some comedy fun. So what else could you want? Okay, then we had Star Trek. Now, the three main players on Star Trek, of course, you go back to the 1960s and you think of the original Star Trek cast. I know right immediately to my mind, I think Captain James T. Kirk, Spock, and Dr. McCoy. You could not have three more different characters. Now, of course, Dr. McCoy, he's a medical doctor. He, when anybody gets sick, he would be the doctor they would go to. Uh, Captain James T. Kirk, of course, he's a captain, but although he's very smart and intelligent, he's oftentimes he lets his anger and his frustration get the best of him. He's kind of reckless at times. Um, Whereas Spock, who is a Vulcan with pointed ears, he comes from another planet. He, on the other hand, he overthinks things. He's very seldom is one to get reckless. I mean, he overthinks, like I said. Spock, his whole life centers around nothing but logic, and if it's not dealing in logic, then it's very unlogical, if you know what I mean. And Spock has hard time dealing with anything without overthinking it. But that is what made those three characters so memorable. When they get together, they get all kinds of trouble together. And again, if you looked at back in the 1960s when Star Trek was on, I mean, what they were able to do special effects wise, it was kind of amateur hour. But you look back on that, and that was kind of very neat. I mean, look at how they would transition from place to place, and just neat stuff. And it was really really fun. And Star Trek, of course, was seen on TV. The interesting thing about Star Trek was it only lasted the original show I'm talking only lasted for like 3 years, 3 seasons. But when it started being played in reruns, it became really super popular. And then, of course, Star Trek, as all these years later, had a life of its own. I mean, they've had many, many Star Trek movies, many different Star Trek TV series. So Star Trek, even though it was only on for 3 seasons, it has had a lifelong legacy that's gone on for about, I think I want to say 40, like 40, 50 years. So, that's a long legacy. And we're still talking about it today in 2025. And of course, Star Trek, once, it gained in its popularity, of course, you had the Trekkies and then you had the Star Wars fans. And the Star Wars and the Trekkie fans usually kind of compete with, the Star Trek fans usually do not like Star Wars stuff, but I'm one of the few that like both. So I think there's room to like a little bit of everything. Why not? And let's see. Then there was Maxwell Smart, of course, from Get Smart, Agent 66, and of course, as we talked about in our last episode about some of those classic TV catchphrases, his was, Chief, I missed it by that much. Okay, again, Maxwell Smart, you know who I'm talking about. Kind of he's not quite Barney Fife. He's a little more intelligent than that, but not much. And of course, he was a bumbling secret agent spy, and he used all these kind of like James Bond type of gadgets, and always getting all kinds of trouble. Just screwing up all the time. But Get Smart, made for some real funny laughter in our lives. Just bumbling comedy, but I loved it. Gidget, of course, Gidget where many of us first saw actress Sally Field, on TV as the young Gidget, the young surfer girl, living with her widowed father, and then her kind of crazy neurotic sister Anne, and her crazy neurotic husband John, who was a psychologist, and Gidget. The show of Gidget, basically, she's hanging out at the beach with her friend LaRue. It seemed like all they did was hang out at the beach, but hey, what a life! And again, that's where many of us first saw Sally Field, and so like you can imagine seeing Sally Field years later in Forrest Gump as Forrest's mother. She at that point even she's aged quite a bit from when she was Gidget on TV, and you're like, when I look at Forrest Gump's mom, it's hard to believe that his mother is actually Gidget, Sally Field. And I'm like, and what does Forrest say? Just like my mom always said, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So again, these are characters from the 1960s. Now we're going to start getting rolling into the 1970s because the 1970s had some real memorable characters, some all-time favorite classic TV shows. I mean, right off the top, okay, Archie Bunker. Who doesn't love Archie Bunker? He's rude, he's crude, but we all love Archie in spite of his flaws. Deep down, we know he's a good guy. He never really hurt anybody. Didn't really mean to hurt anybody. Archie was just raised in a time where, he didn't care really. He kind of was one of those guys that just said what was on his mind. He said what he thought. He didn't really worry too much about, how the other guy felt. It was a lot of times about him. But again, Archie loved his family. He loved his friends. And again, deep down, Archie's a good guy. He doesn't mean to hurt anybody, but sometimes he does. And if it happens, oh well, sorry, didn't mean for it to happen. And of course, Archie is often referred to as a lovable bigot. I mean, and again, talking about All in the Family, that's a show that probably would not get away with all the stuff it got away with. I mean, when they very first night they aired the show, they had to put on a warning because they were worried about how some of the racial stuff that Archie said. We're not going to repeat it here, but again, that's stuff that would not be allowed to be said on TV today. Again, in 1970s, it was a different time. Now, but there's something to be said though, because we just like live in a bubble and pretend like there aren't people like that out there. I think, in all the shows that Norman Lear created, who produced the producer and creator of All in the Family, there are many spin-offs of All in the Family, Maude, The Jeffersons, Good Times, all spawned off of from All in the Family. And so we would not have had Maude, who was Edith Bunker's kind of the complete opposite of Archie Bunker, loudmouth, bleeding heart liberal. And so when her and Archie got together, there was just no getting around it. There's going to be explosions and firecrackers. And of course, Archie's sweet wife, Edith Bunker, was caught in the middle of so many situations like that. I mean, who's she going to side with, her cousin Maude or Archie, her husband? And a lot of times, Archie would say stuff that Edith knew was wrong, but well, she just accepted it because that was just how Archie was. And so, again, all these characters I've just kind of mentioned spawned from All in the Family, and so that's kind of funny to think about. Now, Happy Days was another show in the 1970s that I just loved, and Gary Marshall, who was a creator and writer from that show, he had many spin-offs spawn off of Happy Days. Of course, the first being Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy, and then other shows that he had but was not kind of having anything to do with Happy Days was The Odd Couple. So Gary Marshall, he created with Happy Days a great ensemble cast, and that's why you could tune into every week to Happy Days. And even though we'd hope that the story was based around like Richie or the Fonz, everybody got to have, every character in Happy Days got to have their kind of episode, if you will, or two, centered around them. And that's what made it a fun show. Now, of course, in reference to Happy Days, when the show first launched, it was supposed to be based, around Ron Howard's character of Richie Cunningham. The trials and tribulations of teenager Richie Cunningham in the 1950s, hanging out with his school chums Ralph and Potsy, and his loving mom and dad, Howard and Mary Cunningham, and And that's what the show, initially started off. But then Henry Winkler's character, the Fonz, um, just took off. It was a surprise nobody saw coming. And even Gary Marshall, the show's creator, has said over the years in many interviews that just deciding to allow Fonzie to wear the leather jacket, which is kind of that is the ultimate image of the Fonz, the leather jacket. When you think of the Fonz, you think of the leather jacket, you think of a, um, you think of it. Just Fonz was super cool, and there was no doubt about it. Um, and eventually, at one point, they were going to change the name of the show from Happy Days to Fonzie's Happy Days, and both Ron Howard and Henry Winkler had a problem with that because Henry said like, hey, I'm not, this isn't my show. I'm not going to take the spotlight away from anybody else. Um, and Ron Howard said, yeah, you guys do that, that's fine, but I will then leave the show. And so he ended up they ended up sticking with the name Happy Days, and I'm glad they did because again, in spite of the success of the Fonz character, I mean, I think they've made the wise decision to continue to call it Happy Days because that's what it was. That's what it started out as. Now, there's no denying. If you ask me right here now, who was my favorite character on Happy Days? Well, of course, the Fonz. He was just super cool. There was no doubt about it. The Fonz was cool. I mean, all the guys when we were growing up, we wanted to be the Fonz, and then all the girls wanted to date the Fonz. And all the moms and dads out there were warning their daughters about guys like the Fonz. But again, what made the Fonz super cool, besides all the things he could do and all the chicks he could get, it was the fact that everybody, he was just a super nice guy. I mean, the Fonz was a local hero to many of the, local teenagers. I mean, Richie, when he first, met Richie, anytime Richie and his friends, Ralph and Potsy, would get in a jam, the Fonz would come to their rescue. I mean, he walked in on more than one occasion where those guys were kind of, being picked on, and the Fonz would just look at the guy picking on his buddies and say, "Hey, what's going on here?" And just the Fonz entering the room, the whole situation would change, if you know what I mean. And they, like Ralph and Richie and Posse, they'd be like, "Thank God the Fonz is here. Okay, he'll get us through this." And it was just super show. And then Richie, I mean, even like we talked about having his little catchphrase last time with "I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill," where, like I said, the Fonz was the guy that all the guys wanted to be like. Now, not too many people wanted to be like Richie or Potsy or Ralph. Everybody has their flaws, and those guys, they were often to refer to by the Fonz as, "Hey, what's up? What's up with you nerds?" And it was a lovable term, I guess, but he didn't mean no harm because again, at the end of the day, the Fonz always came through for those guys. And let's not forget, the Fonz could, it was like the universal language. It could mean whatever the Fonz wanted it to mean. It could mean whatever we wanted it to mean. It was just when the Fonz said, "Hey," it was just understood. Hey, I am cool. Don't question me. In fact, they even did a couple episodes I remember about the Fonz thinking he lost his cool. Oh my God. Can you imagine the Fonz losing his cool? I know I couldn't. And again, it's funny to, the motorcycle was a big thing about the Fonz being cool. And another funny thing to do, having to do with the motorcycle is I read in Henry Winkler's book where he said that he never rode a motorcycle. He didn't have a lot of experience riding motorcycles. And so there was never a scene where he actually rode that motorcycle. They had like stunt doubles and stuff like that. So the thing that made the Fonz cool, the leather jacket, the motorcycle, I mean, being able to snap his finger and pretty much doing whatever, again, snapping the fingers is kind of a universal thing. He snapped his fingers, the girls would come running. He'd snap his finger. He'd pretty much get people to do whatever he wanted just by snapping his finger. Another cool thing about the Fonz, how many of us wish that we could just hit that jukebox and the music would start playing? How cool would that be? And again, as a kid watching the show, never even question, wait a minute, how do you do that? Oh, well, hey, wait a minute. Hey, we can't question that. He's a Fonz. Magic. He could do it. Remember the Fonz could turn on and off the lights just by hitting the wall? How many times as a kid did I try that? I was not able to make it happen. Well, okay. And like I said, a couple other shows spawned off into their own spin-off series, if you will. Of course, Mork and Mindy, starring Robin Williams. Now, Robin Williams initially came on to just do one episode of Happy Days as this goofy alien. And Gary Marshall and the other writers on Happy Days really had no idea what to expect. He was discovered at a local, I believe, Los Angeles comedy club, and one of the producers went to see him, and they told Gary Marshall about him, and they specifically thought he was so funny that they wrote an episode, crazy episode where he's this alien, and they said during the filming of the show, or episode rather, he was just kind of coming up with the alien talk all on his own, and a lot of it was ad-libbed, and one of the best episodes, they got such a huge response from that one episode that Gary Marshall decided, hey, let's give this guy his own his own spin-off series. He'll be Mork from a Planet Ork. And they did a whole series based on this Mork alien character. Now, before Mork from Ork, of course, the first spin-off series from Gary Marshall from Happy Days was Laverne and Shirley. And very much like with the Robin Williams episode, Penny Marshall and Cindy Williams made a guest appearance on one episode of Happy Days, where Fonz hooks Richie up with Shirley, and then Fonz goes out on a date, like a double date with Laverne, and they go on a date together, and they kind of go their separate ways, and the crazy adventure, as you can imagine, ensues. And Richie, being a young high school teenager at the time, he's feeling like, oh, yowza, 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 going on a date for the first time with his first older woman, Shirley Feeney. And man, from that, they did, I think they did one or two other episodes on Happy Days, and then the girls got their own show. And then let's talk about Laverne and Shirley. Okay, now that we're there, two other great memorable characters from the 1970s off of Laverne and Shirley, of course, David L. Lander and Michael McKean, who played, of course, the lovable, goofball neighbors, Lenny and Squiggy. Two kind of idiots always getting in trouble together, kind of lovable idiots. I mean, Lenny was a little more lovable, and neither one of them were that intelligent. I mean, Squiggy was, maybe even dumber than Lenny, but it's kind of a toss-up. But Squiggy wasn't as well mannered as Lenny, and so they kind of helped each other out through life, and they were kind of the male version of Laverne and Shirley, and apparently Laverne and Shirley knew the guy since high school. They went to high school together. And they've been friends ever since. And so those were also two memorable characters, Lenny and Squiggy, from Laverne and Shirley, and when we're referencing the 1970s. Okay, now J.J. Evans, we briefly touched on Jimmy Walker's character of James Evans Jr. from Good Times, also from the 1970s. He had his great catchphrase, "Dynamite." Now, like I said, we talked about Jimmy Walker's J.J. Evans in episode 1, so we won't talk too much about him, but he's definitely one of those characters from the 1970s that really deserves to be mentioned here. Let's see. And then, of course, there was James Evans, played by the legendary John Amos, as his father, James Evans Sr. Now, John Amos recently passed away last year, and he lived to be, I believe, like 84, something like that. And so he had a long, healthy life and career, and may John Amos rest in peace. But there's definitely no denying that the role of James Evans, the father on Good Times, he really put his stamp on. I mean, he was kind of a role model for um, for fathers, for Black fathers in the 1970s. He loved his family. He was a very hardworking guy. James Evans never really got ahead in life too much. He was always struggling. He always had a job. He was always putting food on the table for the family. He also believed in disciplining his kids, and when they did wrong, letting them know. Now, of course, John Amos appeared in the first three seasons of Good Times. Now, we talked a lot about how he wasn't a big fan of Dynamite, and he clashed with the producers and writers, and eventually to the point where they fired him and killed off his character. And that is, it was Good Times, with James Evans Sr., and then there's Good Times after the death of James Evans. And I tell you, is one of those moments, in TV history that I'll just never forget, the death of James Evans. Realizing he was killed off, in a car accident when the family was supposed to be moving away, get out of the ghetto, moving to a better life in Mississippi. Once again, like I said, James Evans could never really get ahead, even in his fictional TV life. I mean, they killed him off as a family is supposed to be, leaving the ghetto finally and going on to a better life, and then it's all ruined by tragic car accident. Okay, so that is that. Let's see. Now, another one of my favorite 1970s sitcoms, What's Happening? Of course, I'm talking about Raj, Dwayne, and Rerun. These three knuckleheads, from high school, they hung out together, these buddies that grew up together. Raj and Rerun are kind of the older two of the gang, and then Dwayne's a little younger, but he loves hanging out with Raj and Rerun. Rerun, he's flunked like the 12th grade like 3 or 4 times. He's still going to school, but he's hanging out with these guys, and they get in all kinds of trouble. And then Raj's kind of creepy sister always blackmailing him, and hey, Raj, give me a quarter, and I won't tell Mama what you did, and just get all kinds of hijinks. Raj is kind of the brain of the group, and so that's kind of that was kind of what was going on with What's Happening. But it was another fun show. However, there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes of What's Happening, and show only lasted 3 seasons. But I tell you, that's one of those shows that I wish had a little bit more of a life. But it came back like in the 1980s as What's Happening Now, and again, it only lasted for about 2 or 3 seasons. So again, I love What's Happening. I just wish it would have had more of a life. Great characters. And then let's see. And then of course, who could forget also, we started at the top of the episode talking about Archie Bunker. Well, another character to spawn its own kind of spin-off series from All in the Family, of course, was the Jeffersons. And how could you not love George Jefferson? He's almost kind of him and Archie, like they're both these kind of lovable bigots. They got like loud personalities. Each one of them, like you get these two guys together, Archie and George Jefferson. They're loudmouth, they're rude, they're crude. They're their own. They're both racist, kind of these lovable bigots, if you will, in their own way. Now, of course, George does not think he's a racist, but he thinks Archie's a racist, and vice versa. And so when they were all in the family together, of course they had all kinds of hijinks they get into, they're going off on each other. But then the Jeffersons split off into their own series, and then as the song says, moving on up to upscale, apartment in Manhattan, and then it's talking about how their life got better. So it's kind of it's not quite Good Times because the Jeffersons actually did move up, whereas the Evans, they did not ever really get out of the ghetto until the final episode. And so we'll talk about that in a future episode of Jrock's Pop Culture Revolution. Now, Welcome Back Kotter with the Sweat Hogs, Vinnie Barbarino, Freddie Boom Boom Washington, Arnold Rorschach, ooh, Mr. Cotter, Mr. Cotter. Epstein's note from his mom, Mr. Cotter, okay? Um, Probably the last one I'd have to um, mention for tonight is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. Now, of course, Mary is probably one of the, going back to the 1970s, one of the first kind of iconic, women actresses that really kind of was a role model for many women back in the time. The thing about Mary Tyler Moore Show was Mary Mary Richards was one of the first kind of working women that we saw on TV, and and there's that image of Mary Tyler Moore at the beginning of the show, where she throws her hat up in the air, and that's just one of those iconic images that we have in our mind that you never forget. I mean, when people talk about Mary Tyler Moore, they always talk about that iconic image of her throwing her hat up. And of course, you have Lou Grant, the kind of cranky father-like, boss, at the news station, and then you have the lovable, goofy Ted Baxter. In fact, all of the characters on Mary Tyler Moore Show were really outstanding characters. Great writing. Same people that years later in the 1980s would bring us Cheers. Now, man, this episode has been so much fun to do. Tune in next time when we will be talking about some memorable characters in part 2 of this episode, talking about memorable characters from the 1980s. I hope you've all enjoyed this episode. It was a truckload of fun to do, as you can see. I love talking about pop culture. Take care. Have a great night, and we'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.